The show really started as a series of Facebook Lives where JP and I, who were, the co-hosts of the podcast at that time, were really trying to make sense of what was going on in the world around us at a time when we were cut off. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Real Estate Investors Club podcast. This is kind of a special show. It's going to be a solo episode. This is actually episode 100 of the show. And I wanted to just take a little bit of time to kind of reminisce, go back to how things started. And then also just, talk a little bit about what this experience has been like. So I went back into my Facebook feed, into the podcast feed. This show began in spring of 2020. And I don't know if, most of you, what your memories are like from that time period. It was the beginning of COVID, and the show really started as a series of Facebook Lives where, JP and I, who were, the co-hosts of the podcast at that time, were really trying to make sense of what was going on in the world around us at a time when we were cut off. I think for us real estate investors who are trying to make good decisions, trying to, understand what's happening in the industry and get ahead of the ball, being cut off from all of those in-person interactions, being cut off from all of the on the ground interactions that you have to gauge the market, to understand what's going on, and to, really connect with other people who are in this space. I think that was extremely difficult. But one of the great things that came out of it was this show. And, so through COVID, the, crazy year and a half or 2 years of what it was, doing this podcast was a way for myself to remain connected to some of the industry experts, have those conversations that maybe at a certain point I was having in person, and then also to share them with people. And people, who have similar interests and who also want to continue to develop as investors, as individuals. And for those of you who have been on all of that journey with me, on part of that journey with me, I want to thank you for tuning in on a regular basis. I want to also, whatever kind of stuff was going on in your life through that period, if connecting with the show was something that you did on a regular basis, I want to, thank you for doing that. Do you want to shout out a message or, do something to sort of connect and say, like, what that period or what that experience has been like for you? I'd love to hear it. But that brings me kind of to the other point of what's so great about podcasting. And, I wanted to take maybe just a few minutes to thank all of the guests who've come on the show, who have shared their time, and all of, the great connections that I've made. Because, one of the crazy things about podcasting is you get to like jump into this little echo chamber. I'm going to just move the camera around so you can see, this is like my office here. So, yeah, I'm either sitting in my office or sitting in my home, and having these little half-hour drop-ins of dropping into somebody else's life, having someone drop into my life and connecting with them about questions that matter to me. So obviously the first part of the show is always we share aspects of, whatever the person's business model is. And so that's interesting, to learn about specific industry hacks or learn what works in different spaces, be it sometimes we hear from, American investors, sometimes we hear from Canadian investors. But the idea is to give you guys, all of you listeners, some insight into what works in terms of business practices, what other people are doing in order to succeed and to make their way financially in the space. And then the second half of the show, usually we get a little bit more into kind of personal details, like what sacrifices people had to make on their way to success, what kind of things they think we should be talking about in the industry that we're not. And it just ends up being this like cool little adventure that I get to go on with my guests once a week for half an hour. So, my hope is that you listeners have enjoyed this time, have enjoyed the conversations, and enjoy these little ventures that I go on once a week with my guests. And, my wish is that you continue listening. Obviously, send some feedback if there's anything you would like to see on the show in the next 100 episodes, any themes that we would talk about, any questions that I should regularly ask my guests. I would love to hear about it. And then the last aspect is really to say thank you, listeners, for lending me your ears and for joining me on this journey that's been 100 episodes of talking about real estate investing in Montreal and beyond, and all the things that go into making us better individuals and help us develop as the people who are behind the investing. So, short and sweet, episode 100. Um, take a minute to enjoy this moment with me and tune in next week for another little 30-minute adventure. Thank you.